When an individual makes a decision, and they make their decision on the basis of lies, we don't have any problems saying, that decision's not valid. I think it clearly is an invalid decision because it was based on lies. I'm Sophie Grace-Chappell. I'm the Professor of Philosophy at the Open University, and I've been living in Scotland now since 1998. So as a philosopher, as an ethicist, I'm talking about power relations. I'm talking about the way society is structured because of the forces that make it impossible for people to live a decent life. And what's our hope of building a society like that? Well, I don't see much hope when I look at the UK.
To say that no means out and yes means in, when actually the opposite is true.
The story of how I moved from no to yes is really a story about me not changing in my basic opinions. Those of us who voted no were not voting for the status quo, we were voting for a federal Britain. That was what Better Together were promising.
The sort of power that actually most federal governments in Western Europe, for example, simply don't have.
It's like home rule within the United Kingdom.
This promise of federalism just vanished in the wind, it just went away. And all the loving up that Scotland had been getting from Westminster and from Better Together, all that loving up just disappeared, and it was like the scene in the movie where the hero no longer needs the heroine who's threatening with a big gun. He just tosses her aside once she's no longer useful to him and says, "Let's go." And off they go, leaving her behind in the mud. And Scotland got treated like that, I thought. All these promises were just thrown aside, and the next thing we know, 2015, a jocalypse now.
This would be the first time in our history that a group of nationalists from one part of our country would be involved in altering the direction of the government of our country, and I think that is a frightening prospect.
The same people who were campaigning for Scotland to stay in the Union because it's such an essential part of the Union, the same people were saying that it would be somehow horrifying and improper if Scottish MPs had the balance of power at Westminster. Duly elected Scottish MPs in a Westminster election, contributing to the United Kingdom in the way Scotland's supposed to. Suddenly they're a menace. They need to be treated as something other and strange and threatening.
From just in front of the Palace of Westminster because the Scots have arrived.
I was horrified by that, and I thought it was deeply racist, and I thought it was deeply, deeply undemocratic actually, and of course very perfidious. I mean, they make these promises and then they break them. Being English and living in Scotland for nearly 20 years now has always been interesting. I was at the swings with my kids and somebody was broncoing the swings, and I said to them, "Would you please not do that? That means my kids can't use the swings." I was called four-eyed, various unparliamentary bits of language in there. But what I was really struck by, they didn't call me an English bastard. And I thought, no, that was missing, and that was missing for a reason, because I found Dundee, where I live, a hugely welcoming place, very warm and open. And I'm different in other ways, and I haven't had flack for that either, not in Dundee. I just don't experience anti-English prejudice. I just don't. But what happened between 2014 and 2016 in Britain, to me, was something deeply disturbing, because a kind of narrowness, a kind of intolerance of people who are different in whatever way came to the fore and sort of swept everything before it. It was like UKIP swallowed the Conservative Party, and the two of them swallowed ordinary opinion in a lot of England and sometimes in Scotland too. And I found that deeply disturbing, deeply horrifying. I voted no in 2014 because I wanted to defend the idea of human beings caring for each other no matter where they come from and looking out for each other in larger units, like at the time I thought the UK and like the EU. But now it doesn't look like that anymore. It doesn't look like being in the UK is a way of protecting cosmopolitanism, a way of protecting people from intolerance, a way of protecting people from narrowness and bigotedness of a kind that I thought the Leave campaign was full of. One of the most important documents that underlies my own internationalist and cosmopolitan views is the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And that's about what matters for people, what kind of freedom, what kind of protections people should have. Britain played a noble part in setting that up. And now we've got a government which is committed in its manifesto to tearing that down and going for a British Declaration of Human Rights. Well, my question about that is, if Britain can have its own Declaration of Human Rights, then why can't Mali, where people are stoned to death for having sex outside marriage? Why can't Saudi Arabia, where people are beaten to death by the police for being transgender? Why can't Chechnya, where people are being put in concentration camps for being gay? If Britain goes that way of turning its back on internationalism, then other nations can do the same. And what's more, that's one fear. Another fear I have is that the bigots are out there. They're on the margins of the Conservative Party. They're much stronger in UKIP already. And those people, frankly, I'm not at all convinced that they're not coming to get people like me. Once they've sorted out the Ramonas, once they've sorted out the pesky Scots, who's going to be next in their sights? I'm very worried that it might be gay people, that it might be trans people. I think they'll come after us, and I think they'll have the example of Trump and Putin and Saudi Arabia and Chechnya and Mali behind them, because those are all, well, certainly some of those are regimes that the government is cozying up to in a way that worries me deeply. So I do worry about human rights in Britain, not immediately, but long term I'm very worried about a kind of erosion of respect for difference in our society, which comes from us becoming more nationalistic and less cosmopolitan.
Thank you very much. Today, as we face this critical election for our country, I launch my manifesto for Britain's future.
Well, the way that politics is going at the moment, I find deeply chilling. We have a very authoritarian government who aren't satisfied with the complete autocracy that they've already got. They want more authoritarian control. This election, if it's not about covering up election expenses, seems to be about opportunism, seems to be about taking advantage of a weakened and divided opposition. I can see this government taking steps, for example, I think they're already doing it, to rein in Holyrood. They might even try to close Holyrood down altogether. I'm afraid they're perfectly capable of that.
I hope the United Kingdom government will respect the view of Parliament. This is simply about giving people in Scotland a choice.
But I look at Scotland and I see a government in Holyrood that's putting £47 million into alleviating the effects of Westminster's bedroom tax. I see a government that's standing up for women on benefits who are being forced into a really horrible position by Westminster's rape clause. I see a government which is protesting about food banks, which is protesting about inequality, and which puts forward a programme which is about caring for everybody in society. And my heart worries a bit that I think, can that level of political niceness really survive in such a nasty political world? But I hope it can, because I'm right behind it.
British people have spoken, and the answer is, we're out.
That was the moment when the dam burst and I stopped being a no supporter. I became a yes supporter. I became a supporter of Scottish independence because I looked at the referendum map and it was so clear. I've no malice against England, but they're going a different way from us. And we do need to have a settlement that recognises the differences between Scotland and England that have just been so manifestly clarified in this referendum.
So this whole process is going to demand a willingness to be flexible, to be imaginative, to be innovative, and to try to come up with solutions that are about the best interests of the people that we serve.
So Holyrood come up with clear, carefully thought out suggestions about how Scotland could remain in the single market whilst accepting the vote to leave the EU, could remain in the single market even if England doesn't want to. And those aren't even greeted with a no from Westminster. And there still hasn't been a proper written response. And that too, I just think, is symptomatic of a kind of arrogance, a kind of divorce from actually caring about the will of the people.
And they've lied about this here tonight too, and it's not good enough. You deserve the truth. You deserve the truth.
I do look at a lot of sources online. I look at the websites that I think will tell me the story that I'm not getting from the BBC website or from the Guardian website. And I look at things like Wings Over Scotland and the Wee Ginger Dug and Craig Murray. And from those you hear a story that you're not hearing from the mainstream media. And one of the things that's so strange about Scotland now is that newspaper proprietors sell papers by hooking on to public opinion in some way. And there's this huge block of public opinion, something like 42 to 48% which is pro-SNP, pro-independence, and there's only one newspaper which is clearly catering to that. I wonder how the newspaper owners think their business model is going to work, especially if Scotland goes independent. If there's another big jump, which I think could easily happen, towards yes in the next few years, where are all those adamantly anti-independence papers going to be? Who's going to buy them?
I say to the SNP, now is not the time.
Well, I think we need a referendum as soon as possible, and I think there's been a lot of media distortion about Indie Ref 2, as people often call it. They had a poll in which they said only 25% of the Scots electorate support a referendum. And actually the poll they were referring to said 25% want a referendum now, like me. Something like 26% want a referendum in the next 5 to 7 years. So that's over 50% in favour of a referendum. Let's be quite clear about this. We are being told lies by an elite who serve their own interests and nobody else's. That's one reason I'll be voting yes. Another is because I want to protect the emerging social democracy that we've genuinely got in Scotland, which I think is very exciting to watch. I'll be voting yes because I'm an internationalist and I want us to be part of Europe. If Scotland sets up this beautiful society, this brilliant society where everybody matters, where nobody's excluded, England might well look north and say, hey, we could have a bit of that too. I really believe that Scottish independence long term could be for the benefit of England and Wales and Northern Ireland too. And the safe option, I think, is clearly Scottish independence, not remaining in the UK.